Samantha from Jessimo Tutorials here, and welcome to my resin tips and tricks video. And so today I'm going to be running through a bunch of tips and tricks on how to use two-part resins and UV resins. So you can expect to see me show how to use ice resin, Teresa Tiny Pandora's Deep Shine, this Chinese resin which has been quite frequently used across the groups, and Lisa Pavelka's Magic Gloss. So that is what I'm going to be demonstrating today. I'll show you how to use it, and I'll include a bunch of different tips and tricks on how to get the best result. So before we start, you might be completely new to resin, so I want to show you exactly what you can actually use this resin for in regards to polymer clay. So here is one project that I made recently. I have a tutorial on this. Here's another one. You can use it as a highlight just in the center over here. The rest is just polymer clay. You can use it just as a top glaze again. You can see how beautiful that is. And the metallic clay over here really pops out with the resin on top of it. You can use it to fill some bezels. I've done a tutorial on this as well, where you can see it is translucent in the back here. And here's another example of that technique. And finally, here's another one. You can see there's a whole bunch over here. So that is basically what you can use resin for. It essentially just gives a glossy top coat to polymer clay and hides a lot of imperfections. So that is what you would use resin for. You would use it for a really nice glossy finish, and it hides a lot of imperfections. So that's what you would use it for. Now I want to show you something. I just want to show you what a difference the resin makes on the clay. So I've got a few examples over here. So I just want to bring out metallic clay. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. I'm sorry about my fingers, by the way. I've been working with alcohol ink and they're a little stained. I washed them as much as I could. Now this is a piece that's been sanded and buffed a little bit. You can see it's got a nice sheen to it, but the metallic's not really bouncing out all that much. Here's the same piece that had a very light sand with 400 grit, but has not been sanded to a high grit and has not been buffed, but has a coat of resin on it. It saves you a lot of work, and you can see that that metallic comes out a lot better. The same goes for black polymer clay. This one has been sanded and buffed. This one's just been sanded quickly, and you can see it brings out the colour, gives a much shinier finish. Again, same for opaque clays and translucent clays. Here is a piece of red that's been sanded and buffed. Here is a piece of red with resin on it. So that is what you can expect to see when you're putting resin on your polymer clay. It will bring out the colours, make them stronger, it will hide any imperfections, and it will just make the entire thing really glossy. So that is what you can expect with resin. And that goes for any resin essentially. Now I do want to talk about the work surface quickly before we go into specific resins. I highly recommend using a silicone waffle mat essentially. It's just a silicone mat with all of these divots inside of it, as you can see. Let me just zoom out for you again. There we are. And if you're looking for one, I do sell one on my Etsy shop, Jessimo Design. It's flexible, and what happens is when you get the resin on it, you can just simply bend the mat and the resin comes right off, like so. Whereas if you are putting it on something like a ceramic tile, glass tile, paper, anything essentially like that, the resin will stick to it, which will bond your piece essentially to your work surface, and it will just end up with a huge mess. And also looking for something with divots in it rather than a flat surface also means that if you happen to have your resin spill over the side of your bead, it's going to pull mostly in these, which will make trimming it much easier. And I will go deeper into that later on. So highly recommend a silicone work surface. So that's all you need to know to start with your resin. I'm now going to go into specific resins. There are two types of resins. There are two-part resins, where you have a resin that comes in two bottles, and you need to mix specific parts of each. So for ice resin, you mix equal parts of each to create a resin. Some you need to mix 2 parts one, 1 part the other. It depends on which resin you're using. So those are the 2-part resins. And then you have the UV resins, which essentially come in 1 part. You do not need to do any mixing, and they are faster so as far as curing goes. And here are the brands that I have. So Magic Gloss gives you a really nice dome. And then there are 2 other resins which don't really give a huge dome, but they will give you a glossy finish, and these are the 2 brands that will do that for you. So we're going to talk about the UV resin first, because that is definitely the easiest one to use. It's a little bit more expensive than the 2-part resins, but it is definitely easier to use. So I first want to talk about setting up your light, because you're going to need a UV lamp to work with these resins. Okay, so excuse the change in scenery. I had to move to a bigger table so that I could show you this. This is the UV lamp that I have. Usually they come with a base, but I have removed that. You can see that it comes with lights at the back here. You want something fairly large, something you could at least fit a whole hand into without being squished. And generally it does have a base here, but I like to remove that. Okay, so basically if you're working with flat pieces, and I'll bring that over, I've got a few bits here that I want to show you. You will work on your silicone mat. Let's pretend this is our flat piece that we want to resin. You'll simply put it onto your mat. You'll put the resin on top away from the UV lamp. You don't want to have it near the UV lamp when you're working with it. Then you'll have it on your mat, and then all you do is you slide your mat under. And this is why I've removed this base, because my silicone mat doesn't sit under there. And then that's all you need to do. You'll switch on the light. You want to try and get a light that stays on permanently rather than the ones that are timed for 5 minutes. And then you will leave it under there for at least 15 minutes, in my opinion. So that's what you do for flat beads. Now what if you have round beads that you want to resin? And yes, I will be showing you how to do that. What you do is you get a little pin or a piece of wire. You attach your bead. You will put the resin on, so let's pretend this has the resin on, so you don't want to be touching it. And you will have this pre-prepared before you actually resin your bead. You'll take 2 pieces of wood, make sure that they will fit inside of your UV lamp. So take that, set it, and before you put resin on your bead, you'll make sure that your piercing pin sits nicely between them, like so. Then you'll go pop your bead on top of there, resin it, and then once it is resined, you'll balance that on top of the wood and slide your UV lamp over it, and you will cure that for roughly 15 minutes. And that is how you set up the UV lamp, so that your bead doesn't touch the floor or anything like that. And if you're worried about any spills before you resin your bead, what you can do is you just grab another silicone mat, you put the pieces of wood down, you have your resin bead, you put it over the top, and then you put the lamp over the top of it and cure it. So that is how I set up my UV lamp. It depends on what I am making, but that is essentially how I would do it. Okay, so now that we have set up everything, we are going to go into how to use the UV resins. So we are going to be working on our mat. So just position that so that it's in a good spot for you, so that you can see where that is. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to be working with 3 different types of UV resins. So I've got 3 different beads that we are going to be using. So we have 2 cabochons here, as you can see, and then I also have a flat one over here, and this is what we're going to need. Now this one, although it can give you a dome, I would not recommend it highly for doming. It's much better to be used on domed surfaces, which is something that most resins can't do. So this is specifically used for the most part for surfaces that are not flat. Same goes for this one. You can use it on a flat piece, but it is not the best resin for that. It is best for domed pieces. However, the UV resin that will work the best on non-domed pieces, flat pieces, is Lisa Pavelka's Magic Gloss, and this one will not work on domed pieces. So I'll go into these each specifically. So we're going to work with Lisa Pavelka's Magic Gloss. You're going to need a flat piece. Now this is a trial piece that I've made specifically for the tutorial. This is not what a finished piece should look like before you put the resin on. I'll bring over an example of that. You want the sides and back to be sanded properly, and the front, if possible, should have a light sand as well before you put the resin on. Because keep in mind, once the resin is on, you really don't want to be going with the sanding paper near it because you can end up with scratches. So make sure your back and sides are finished off completely, and that you don't need to do any more bakes. Okay, so we're just going to open up that UV resin, and all we're going to do is we are going to gently pour it on top. Now, important thing with UV resin is you want to pour less than what you think you need. So here, I don't think this is the right amount, but to start with, this is what we're going to pour on, because you want to make sure that you do not pour too much, because if you pour too much, it's very hard to take it away, whereas if you pour too little, you can always add a bit. And this is the best tip as far as preventing spills go. And then you're just going to take that and a little wooden skewer, and you're just going to drag it to the edges. And now hopefully you can see as I'm working here how it's bringing out that beautiful black colour, and it's just deepening all of those colours. And now specifically with Magic Gloss, you are going to want to go for a nice high dome, because this resin pulls away from the edges of your clay quite a bit, because it is meant to give a really nice high dome. So that might look like it's covered the whole surface and that's it, but give it a minute or less and you will find that it is starting to drag away from the edges. So you always want to add more. So that's about right. I think that's about the right amount. I might need to add more. Then you will just go and gently drag it to those edges again. And now this resin is about being patient. In the beginning, the cure process is quite fast, but to get a really nice finish and not have to do double layers, I find that it's best to just be patient in the beginning. So now you leave that for a few seconds. You should be able to see it pulling away from the edge if it's going to. I'm just watching it. It looks like I have enough on there that it's not pulling away from the edges. So you'll close up your resin, give it a moment again, just make sure that there are no edges being pulled away, and then you would put that into your UV lamp. But before you do that, you want to make sure that there are no bubbles. Now let me just zoom in. Hopefully the camera will be able to focus on that. Hopefully you can see that there are a group of bubbles over here. Now there are different techniques for getting rid of bubbles. You can use a butane torch. You just lightly glide over the surface. 1 second is all you need to pop them. If you're a little bit scared of a butane torch because your work surface can't really handle something that hot with all the stuff around, or just because it's a little bit hazardous, you can always take a skewer and just gently scoop out those bubbles, and just wipe it onto your silicone mat or onto a towel, because if it's on the silicone mat it will cure along with the rest and you can just pop that off later. Okay, so I don't see any more bubbles, and while we're doing the bubbles you will have been able to see whether it is pulling away from the edges. I do not see any edges being pulled away, so that means that we have a high enough dome. So then I will put this into the UV lamp for half an hour, and it should be properly cured by then. And this is how you would avoid spills. Now I do want to show you how to take care of spills, so I am going to purposefully put too much resin on here. Now this is ideal, this is what you would go with, but let's say you add too much resin. So I'm just going to pour a bit more on, enough that I would definitely get a spill. There we are. And you can see we're getting a spill down that end. When that happens, leave it. You want to let it spill naturally. You can see that it is gently flowing into these areas. And what you can do is, if you're a little bit worried that there's a lot being spilled off, you can always just drag it out into more of these areas so that it fills out, so that it doesn't stop pooling under the pendant. So you can do that. Just drag it out so that it fills up these edges, so that it flattens out around here. You don't want a huge amount of the resin around here. Okay, so you'll just drag it out and it will fill up those areas. Okay, and if this happens, a lot of the time you're going to need to do a second coat, because you'll find that there is some pulling away from the edges because a lot of the resin comes off. So you really want to avoid having spills like this. So you can see it spilled over there. Okay, so once you've done that, the best thing to do now is to go and put that into the UV lamp. Cure it for about 15 minutes. I usually put magic gloss in for about half an hour to get a really solid cure, but if you have a spill, put it in for 15 minutes and I will show you what to do after that. Okay, so while that is in the machine, I'm just going to bring over another silicone mat, and let me just zoom out a bit for you. And we are going to go over the other UV resins. So they're basically the same. Tiny Pandora's is definitely the higher quality one, but if you can't get hold of Tiny Pandora's, this one will work really well. So I just want to make sure that it's empty. Let me make sure if there's a seal. Here we go, because this is a brand new bottle for me. So I'm just going to take off that seal. And in the meantime, we have that UV lamp going. Okay. Now I'm just going to grab this UV resin, and you want to have a brush ready, and this is a UV resin dedicated brush. Just brush it onto there, and then you want a very thin layer. And then you'll brush it over, and you can see how that brings out all of those colours. And this is translucent clay, okay? So you can see how it clears up that cloudiness. And you'll just brush it on and go slowly. You do not want to dump a whole bunch of resin on, and this is why I like to put it on the brush first, because that's generally how I actually gauge how much resin I'm putting on. So if I'm putting too much on, we will end up with spills. Now this one, the spills are a little hard to fix, so it's definitely better to just brush it on correctly, and you'll end up with a few little drips along the side. That is normal, but avoid resin spills at all costs. And basically the way you get resin spills is going to be the exact same as the other one that we just did. You're just going to have the resin spill over the edge. So I'm not going to demonstrate another one. Basically the technique for fixing the previous one is the exact same as fixing this one. Okay, then I'm just going to wipe off that brush, get rid of that UV resin, and I will show you how to use Tiny Pandora's. Basically the exact same, except that you dip your brush in this time around. Because it's a little thicker. And you'll brush that one on as well. So with this one you're less likely to get spills, and you can give a more consistent coat, and that is why Tiny Pandora's resin is the better quality one. But again, if you cannot afford it or you can't get it, the shipping price is really expensive, the other one will work as well. And there you go, you can see how beautiful those is. Now always clean up your resin brush, because it is UV resin on this, so if it is exposed to direct sunlight in any way, it will cure on your brush and your brush will be unusable. Okay, and then these will go into the UV light for half an hour as well. Oh, and just something I forgot to mention quickly. When you're brushing these on, if you're putting on a thin coat, generally you don't get any air bubbles, so I wouldn't worry about that. It's just with the doming resins generally that you need to worry about air bubbles. Okay, now it has been probably about 6 minutes, I would say. And I just want to show you something. You can stop at 6 minutes as far as this one's spill goes. just ignore these ones, they're just sitting off to the side here. Now what you can do is you can take a blade, and now if I press on this, hopefully you can see how it is still quite flexible. And now you can take a blade and you can very gently coax around the edge here. Don't press too hard because you can drag your resin off. You just want to just create a slight line along here. Okay, there we are. And that is just going to mean that's easier to remove later on. Now I'm not sure if you can pick up on the camera, but I do have a few creases around here. That is normal. Unfortunately, that is what happens when you have a spill with UV resin. It's slightly different if you have a two-part resin, but with UV resin, unfortunately, the spills cause quite a bit of trouble. So now I'm going to put that back in for another 5 minutes or so, at least. And then when that is done, I can show you how to use that. Okay, so this has been in for about another 10 minutes. Now we are going to seal the deal as far as it goes. Just going to use our blade, and we should be able to touch it by now. It's still a little soft, but you should be able to use your blade to actually cut that resin away. And now the underlying thing here is to just avoid spills. But if you do get one, this is the best way to clean it up as far as the UV resin goes. Then just use your blade to scrape away the stuff at the bottom, which will still be raw, essentially, because the UV light can't penetrate through polymer clay. So that stuff will be easy to remove. Okay, now I just want to get this out the way, and I'm going to bring over a wet wipe. And then you'll gently clean the bottom. And you might need to sand it. And then you just can pick off the leftover bits of resin along the side. And then use your blade to trim away what's left. Now you're going to get fingerprints and you're going to get all sorts of issues along the top. Which is fine because you need to do a second layer. Be careful not to hold it on top though. And when doing this, just be careful because you don't want to slice yourself by accident. Okay, and then you might need to give your sides a gentle sand afterwards, which is not ideal but necessary. Okay, I'll remove that, and now you can see that this is not a nice even coat. It's got ripples and stuff. Now this is something I actually want to explore, just as an off note. You might actually like this effect where you've got a texture with the resin. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now all you would do is you're just going to grab your resin again. And unfortunately this is a waste of the resin when you get a spill. But sometimes it happens, so don't feel bad. Everyone has a spill every once in a while. Okay, so just pour it on, little bit, not too much. Remember, less is more in this. Drag it over to the edges. And what it does is it will self-level, it will equalize, so that you don't have that texture as far as the resin goes anymore. You won't be able to see those ripples. Okay. And just make sure to always drag it out to the edges. You can't just touch up one spot, it needs to be the whole piece, otherwise it won't work. Okay, and now I've got some pulling away, so I'm just going to add a little bit more. Again, not too much, just a touch more. drag it to the edges, and there we are. And then you would scoop out bubbles, because there are a few. Okay, and now another thing is, if you get the get a spill and you don't want to waste the resin, and it's not in the UV lamp, because a lot of the time I find that the resin spills appear while they're in the UV lamp because they have a lot of time to sit in there and you're not washing them necessarily. If they don't appear before you put them in the resin in the UV lamp, like this one did, like we had the spill right on the mat before we even put it in the UV lamp, what you can do is you can open up the cap of your resin bottle. So this one's a little stuck because it's a little old, but let me get that off. There we are. You'll open it up so you have a nice hole there, and then you can take your bead and you can gently scrape the resin back into the UV bottle. Wipe away all of the resin residue on your bead, make sure to clean it properly, and then you can retry. And that is a way you can save your resin. However, if it is already in the UV lamp and it is already partially cured, you cannot do that. So I just wanted to tell you that. Now this, make sure that you leave it on the thing. You can see that it's not completely cured. It's a little damp on the bottom. So you can pick that up and then you can get rid of the rest later on. Okay, so I'm going to pop that into the UV lamp, and I'm just going to take this out quickly because they're done. There we are. Okay, now as for these, the magic gloss will have cured completely by now. It is nice, hard, smooth, and beautiful to touch. Now you might see that the surface is a little bit uneven. If you notice that, you can always give it a second coat if you want. Make sure that the first coat is completely cured though. Now, as far as the Chinese resin goes, this brand, it will not be cured by now. It will still have a slightly tacky feeling. I'm not sure if you can hear this, but hopefully you can hear that it's sticking to my finger. You can see it gives a really nice coat. Again, if you have any spots, you can always give it a second coat. As far as the tackiness goes, the best way to deal with that is to put it in for a full half an hour instead of 15 minutes like the tiny Pandora resin. And then you need to leave it for 24 hours afterwards for the tackiness to go away completely. But other than that, it works really well. So that is how you would deal with those ones. Now I'm going to wait for the other piece to completely finish, and then I will show you another trick or two. Okay, so this is out of the UV lamp, and you can see it has a nice clean sheen to it. You can't see that there are any ripples in it. There is a little bit of a scratchy side along here, so you would want to give that a very light sand. But other than that, you can see it has been fixed pretty well. So now something that I do want to show you is how to deal with scratches. So let's say, for instance with this one, let's say that, actually no, I'll show it on this one. This will be a good one. Yeah, here we go. So let's have a look at this. You can see that we have a plain spot over here where the resin pulled away. Hopefully you can see that there. But other than that, we've got a nice smooth surface. So I want to show you how to fix that, and also I want to help you fix something that might have had scratches in it. So let's say you were using sandpaper and you accidentally got a scratch on it, or maybe you had a scratch or a fingerprint after it came out of the UV light and it had a scratch or something on it. This one doesn't, but I'm going to show you now. So you might be going, no, it's such a nice bead, don't do it. But there, you can see I've done the scratches, it's too late. So how do you fix that? I will show you. Bring over the UV lamp, or the resin mat. Again, you can see, you can just scoop that out, very easy. Okay, so all you do is you pop that over there, you'll grab your resin again, and again, less is more. Pop that over the surface, and you can see those scratches are disappearing. So here's another one. I'll just pop another one here so you can see. So hopefully you can see that there. Yep. We're going to apply the resin and just watch those scratches melt away. There we are. We have no more scratches. They're all gone. So that is how you would remove scratches or fingerprints if you had any. All you do is you apply another layer of resin. And this one needed another layer because you can see there that I had a spot that was not completely covered in resin. So you just add another layer. And you can see there's a very small amount of resin on here. I'm just going to scrape it over to the edges. You can add more later. Again, same principle of add a little bit, pull it all up to the edges so it's nice and even, and then add more if needed. So that is how you would get rid of any imperfections on the top of your resin if you had any. However, if you do have fingerprints or it's dirty or something like that, I would recommend wiping the surface thoroughly with a wet cloth with maybe some soap, just to make sure that you get rid of any oils or something. Trying to find the right word here. Any substances on the top of your resin, because that will still appear after you've put a coat of resin on. It needs to be completely clean. But any texture that is on the surface, such as a fingerprint that has been cleaned, will not show after you have put another layer on, which is a great thing about resin. So now we just want to apply this. And now another thing I just want to point out while we're doing this, shapes that have a sharp curve in them, such as the heart over here, you can see that there's quite a sharp curve around there. You're going to expect these to have more spills than shapes that would have a nice round shape. So with these you can generally expect to have a spill actually. So if you are having trouble, think about the shape as well. Sometimes changing the shape of your piece can help prevent these sorts of things. Okay, now again, as usual, just going to scoop out all of those bubbles because we don't want those. And then it would go in for another half an hour in the UV lamp. And I do think that's just about it for the UV resin. I think I've covered just about everything. So next we can move on to the two-part resins. You can see this one's giving trouble. I might try flatter surface to try and get that out. There. And it's important to get rid of these bubbles, especially in UV resin, because they float to the top and they actually can provide a texture on the top. So you really want to make sure you get rid of them. Okay, and then I'm going to pop that into the UV light. Okay, so I do have one more thing to talk about as far as UV resins go, and that is how to varnish a round bead. I almost completely forgot about that. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to grab your brand of UV resin, and I'm going to be using this one today. Actually no, I'll use this one because this one cures faster. And we'll grab our 2 blocks of wood, and I can move these over into the UV lamp in a moment. And I'm just going to open up that UV resin. Okay. And I'm just getting a bit on my brush. I know you can't see it, but I need it to be out the way. There we go. And then just hold this, and then I like to just gently spin the bead to start with, and then we can even it out in a second. So just continue spinning, and this will start to get a nice even coat on there. And I'm just tending to a few of those areas. go. Don't want any spots. So I just spin to get most of the resin on, and then I'll fix any imperfections afterwards. Okay, and I'm just going to pick this up to have a look from over here because I can't get to it from there, sorry. I know I'm off camera, I'll be there in just a second. Okay, there we go, and then that will go into the UV light for 15 minutes and you'll see what that looks like when it is done. Okay, so now that we are done with the UV resin, I'm going to be starting on 2-part resins. And now you might be wondering why bother with 2-part resins if you already have UV resin and the UV resin is easier. The simple reason for it is it's just a lot cheaper. So if you're on a budget problem or you want to use a lot of resin and you can't really justify using the UV resin in such large quantities, go with the 2-part resins. Also, there are certain techniques that cannot be used as far as UV resin goes. Most of those techniques come down to the fact that you're using inclusions in the resin, such as here, this centerpiece over here is resin. Now you can use resin over the top, the UV resin over the top, because it is all exposed to the UV lamp. However, inside here I was putting a lot of alcohol inks and other bits and pieces inside, and that is going to hinder the light's ability to penetrate through the resin, which will mean that the UV resin won't cure properly. So in that case you would want to use a 2-part resin which doesn't require a light. You could cure it in the dark and it would still cure. So that is why you would want to use 2-part resins. So the one that I recommend is ice resin. There are a few other brands, but this is the one that I primarily use. So you're going to need a mixing cup with markings along the side to help you measure how much you are pouring out. And you will want a little stick with a paddle on the one side. Okay, now I just need to drop my chair so that I can see this from the side here. And I'm going to be mixing 10 milliliters. And I'm going to start, and this is only for ice resin. Part A of the resin is the slowest flowing, and that is the one that I like to start with. I just find that starting with the slowest flowing bit's the best. And if it's going too slow for you, what you can do is you can grab your stick, stick it down inside there to open up that hole. There we go. And that should flow faster now. There we go. Okay, and then you want to just circle around the base because that will get that resin flowing out better. Okay, and then I like to wait for it to level. I like to move it around, get it to touch all the sides, so that I can make sure that I am getting an equal amount. And now you might think this is a lot of trouble, and it's not fun, I won't lie, but I'm going to show you a tool that you can get that will help skip completely this part of the process. But first I want to show you, for those of you who do not have the tool or can't get the tool, how to do it with just the resin. So I'm just pouring up until the 5 milliliter mark. Then I'm stopping, closing the cap, letting it level for a moment to make sure that I've got that right, and then I'll move on to the fast flowing part. Now you want to go slowly with this because you need to get equal. You need to have another 5 parts, so I'm going to stop at the 10 millimeter mark. Milliliter, sorry, I keep saying millimeter. And notice I'm still pouring in a circular direction, because that means that I can make sure that it is leveling correctly. And now the reason I start with the resin part of, excuse me, let me rephrase that. The reason I start with part A of the resin is because first off it is the slowest flowing, and also because it is not the catalyst that's going to get the resin to cure. Part B and it actually says the hardener on there, that is the catalyst. So depending on how much you pour into the resin, that is how fast it's going to cure. Now you want it to pour equal parts to the resin, but let's say you're not sure if you've poured enough or if you've poured too little, you can add a little bit more, and the resin will probably cure a bit faster, but it will still cure. Whereas if you're not sure if you've added too much or too little of the resin, if you add too much of the resin, it won't cure at all. It will just kind of cure into the sticky mess. So that is why I work with the hardener last. Okay. Now we're just going to mix it. And now you can take your time to slowly mix it to avoid as many of the air bubbles as possible. I find you still get a lot of air bubbles, and if you're not pouring it into a bezel where a lot of the air bubbles are going to stay and not be able to rise to the surface, I find that just mixing it somewhat quickly and then putting it onto a surface of a bead, it's fairly easy to get the bubbles out off the surface of a bead. However, if it's in a bezel, you want to mix as slowly as possible. And you really do want to take your time mixing this. It's cloudy at the moment. It should be completely clear. It should be crystal clear. And you also want to periodically wipe off your tool that you're using to mix it. So generally I'll mix this for at least 2 minutes or until it is clear, and then for another minute after that. And that is what you would do with generally just about any brand of two-pot resin. However, if you're getting a different brand, just make sure what the quantities of each need to be mixed together. Some it is equal parts mixed, some it is 2 parts one and 1 part the other, so just make sure that you're getting those quantities correct. Okay, and you can see that we're starting to get a lot clearer. You can see there, but there is still quite a few lines in it, so I'm going to continue mixing for probably about another 30 seconds. Okay, then after mixing you're going to find that there are definitely quite a few air bubbles. I like to take this, leave it off to the side for a little while, and in the meantime I'll prepare my pendants. Now, keep in mind when you're working with two-pot resins, you are working against the clock. It's not going to be cured under a UV light. It is cured simply by the reaction between the two pots. So generally, I would say you have about a half an hour to work with it after you've mixed the two pots together. Now that can change depending on the temperature that you work at. So if it's colder, it will take longer to cure, up to about an hour as far as ice resin goes. If you are working in hotter temperatures, it will speed up the curing time. Sometimes if it's really hot, it can cure within 15 minutes, or at least start to harden within 15 minutes. So you want to have your beads done within that amount of time. Now that can change depending on each resin brand that you're working with, so be sure to check the cure time whenever you are buying a brand of two-part resin. Okay, now this has been sitting for a moment. Hopefully you can see that those bubbles have definitely started to rise. Now you can leave it like that and then put it onto your piece and then use a butane torch, or you can use a straw, and now you just want to be blowing out and you want to blow around and this will pop the bubbles. Now the trick to this is to blow softly and to try and make your breath as soft as possible, if that makes sense. If you blow hard, it's not really going to pop the bubbles and it's going to blow the resin all over the place. So softly and gently. Okay, and you can still see there are a few bubbles in there. That will get taken care of once it's been put onto the piece. Okay. Now I'm just gently going to pour that on, and again, same with the UV resin, if not more than with the UV resin, you want to pour a little bit on. Ice resin does not have as high a dome factor as the UV resin, as the Magic Gloss does, so it will spill a lot more quickly than Magic Gloss does. So dip your paddle in, that's generally what I like to do, and then put it to the edge. And you can see that I accidentally dripped a bit over there. Generally if you pull this away, it won't cause any issues. But that's about as high a dome as you can get. with UV resins. Excuse me, I keep saying that, with 2-part resins. So I'm just going to move that away so that's not going to cause an issue. There we go. Okay, then you'll just leave that, and if there's some areas that are getting pulled away, like there is a spot there, you can add just a touch more. I don't generally pour it on, I generally dip my paddle in and then go and touch up on that specific spot. And that is how I work with ice resin. Okay, now I do want to do another one because I want to show you a little trick. Again, pouring a little bit on in the beginning. And you can see there's plenty of bubbles in there. Don't worry, we will fix that. Very easy to fix it. Especially since we've got a pretty thin layer of resin. Now this is the resin that I would recommend using in bezels or cabochon molds, because the UV resin can cause issues, and I explained that earlier. Okay, and we're getting a little bit of a pulling away over there and over there. This resin will still pull away from the edges occasionally, so just be sure to check that. And this one you have a lot of time to work with. Alright, so now we've got our 2 pieces, and now one of them I want to show you how to pop the bubbles, and then another one I want to show you a quick trick with that. So you can get rid of the bubbles pretty easily, like that. Now let me just move this over because I don't want it in the way for this. Okay. Now you can use a heat gun or a hairdryer if you happen to have any. This is not completely necessary, you can just use the straw to blow over the surface, but if you have a heat gun, set it on the hottest setting, lowest wind speed, heat it up for 5 seconds and then run it quickly over the surface. It's very similar to a butane torch, but nowhere near as dangerous. And I ran it a few times, it's 1 second, run over, then repeat a few times. And you will still have a few air bubbles, you need to wait a little while for those to come back up. But essentially that's another way to pop your bubbles if you have any. Now this one I've got a few edges that are refusing to take the resin. I'll just keep adding. Okay. Now, I want to show you how to deal with a spill with these ones. So this one I'm going to leave as it is. This one I'm going to purposefully create a spill. So I'm going to add too much resin. And I want to show you how far you can push it. So there, it should probably be fine. It's at its absolute limit there. I'll add a little bit more. We'll probably get a spill in a moment. And we're really pushing it. There, you can see it starting to go over there. Okay, and again, just like with the UV resin, leave it, don't touch it. If you want to and you want to save the resin, you can always scoop it back into the pot and you can clean off the bead and repeat if you want. But I want to show you what to do if you just leave the spill. Okay, push it out to these edges so that if it wants to flow, it can. So that it's not just pooling up around the edge of your bead. Okay, there we go. Alright, and then you would just leave that. And sometimes you can get multiple spills. So if you get multiple spills, just watch it and repeat. Don't touch it. That is the most important thing. You don't want to be messing with it too much. You just want to help it flow so that it gets off the amount of resin that it's not happy with. And again, you'll probably need to do a second coat. So just leave it. Okay, Now generally this resin will take about 24 hours to cure at least, sometimes a little bit longer than that. Now that is a long time to wait, and I'm an impatient person. I'm sure that some of you are impatient as well, and unlike the UV resin, which takes about 15 minutes to half an hour, 24 hours is a really long time. So how do you speed that up? Well, there is a way you can speed it up, and that is by putting it in the oven. And I put my resin into the oven at about 50 Celsius. It should be warm enough that you can put your hand in without it feeling unpleasantly hot. It should feel like a really nice, cozy warmth. And that is going to speed up the curing of your resin. It will probably take it down from 24 hours to about 3 hours, about 3 to 5 hours. But you just want to make sure that it is not too hot. That is quite important. And you can really see here, this one's spilling quite happily away. So generally in this case, because a lot of the time you end up with a really large spill because there's not a lot of surface tension, and it will just continue spilling until, well, you have very little resin on the surface. Generally I'll scrape that back into the pot, but I do want to show you how to fix a spill like this. Okay, so I'm going to put these into the oven, and in about 3 hours time they will be cured hard enough that we can start to touch them. Remember, 50 Celsius or lower. Okay, now while that is in the oven, I want to talk about a few things. Now we're going to get onto the resin plunger in a moment. That is going to be right at the end. For the moment, I want to talk about two things. First thing is, you've got waste in the cup. So there's more resin here than I actually needed. What do you do with that? I always keep some beads aside that still need another coat of resin. So this one, I have a few bubbles on the surface. Hopefully you can see that. So that one needs another coat of resin. This one has a bit of a blank area over here, so that one also needs another coat of resin. And these ones I always keep aside. Don't worry about them. They just go into a little pot off to the side, and whenever I do resin again, the leftover resin goes to these. So you can just coat those however you want, and you can just treat them as though it's the first time you're resining them. So that is what I like to do with waste resin. Okay, so let's say you used up all of your beads and you still had a little bit of waste in the cup, like here. You can see there's a bit of waste at the bottom here, but it is completely cured. So what you want to do is you want to leave it in the cup, put it down like that, put your paddle in like so, and leave it to cure. This has been curing for about 24 hours and it is solid. And now what I like to do, and this sometimes does not work, but essentially what you want to do is you want to try and start to move it around in there. Hopefully this works for you, and it didn't work. Sometimes what happens is if you leave this inside, it will stick enough to it that you can pull it out. And now the more waste you have, the harder this is. So try to use up as much of the resin as you can. I really do want to demonstrate this. So I'm just going to push on the bottom. Hopefully get that resin to start moving. I'm just going to bring over a craft knife, and I'm just sticking it down the sides here, and that's going to get the resin to break its seal with the cup. And that's what you can hear it doing at the moment. So don't push hard, it just needs to have its seal broken. There we go. And then I'll push from this bottom side. Okay, and then I'll bring this over and see if I can lift it out again. And I can see it's starting to come out slowly. You can see here it's starting to break the seal around there. So going again with this. Then I can see it starting to move. And you can skip ahead if you don't want to watch this. But I want to show you how to get it out because I'm pretty sure some of you have experienced this issue. If I have. So I'm going to continue messing with it and try and get it out. But generally, if you have not too much waste in your cup and you pull on it with your paddle, it should come right out. Okay, and it's starting to come out. I'm just going to slot this in, turn it, and use that to start pulling this out. There we are. And there we go. Came out in one piece, and then you can use this to just kind of scrape out any other little bits, and then you can use this cup again. Easy. There we go. Now the bottom side's always going to be a little bit sticky, so make sure to throw that away. Okay, so that is what you do with the waste. So finally, I would like to show you a few things that are finished. While we have been talking and doing the UV resin, our bead here has finished curing as far as the UV resin goes. Touching it, it's finished, and you might need to break it a little bit to get it off there, but there you are. Nice, shiny, and clean. So that is how you would UV resin a round bead. And this one is almost done. And it actually had a little spill here while it was in the UV light. That's fine. You would repeat what I've shown you before to clean up that spill. So you can see spills are quite common, so you need to learn how to fix them up, and don't worry when you get one. They're pretty easy to clean up. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about a plunger that you can get for UV resin. Excuse me, for two-part resins. And this is an ice resin plunger. And now this one has been used all up. Usually when you get it, let me show you this, it will be completely full. One will have the hardener, one will have the resin. You can push on it to get equal parts to come out, and it does the mixing, the measuring for you. But what happens when you run out? Because they're quite expensive, and generally they're at the price where you might as well just use UV resin. They are refillable, and I'm going to show you how to refill them. So you always start with the slowest flowing part, which is the resin. And make sure you get the right side, because otherwise you're going to get weird effects. And the way you generally tell that is one side's more yellow than the other. The resin is the bluer colour, whereas the one with the yellow colour is the hardener. So what you're going to do is you're going to push your plungers up to about there. Grab your resin, and I'm just letting it flow down to the bottom. Pop that in, push, and then pull plunger. There we are. You can see that starting to flow in there. And this is a little bit of a slowish process. It's definitely slow. And this is why I like to use the slower flowing part of the resin. But there we are, you can see that it's filling up pretty quickly. Okay, and at this point where the plunger stops wanting to pull out, I will push it right back up again. Put the resin back in, squeeze, and pull. And you should see it, this wants to pull back up, see? And once it stops doing that, generally I will then stop and refill again. Okay, and I like to stop about there. Then you move on to the next one, which is the hardener. And again, you'll push that up as far as you can. And this is why I say start with the slowest flowing part, because it's harder to fill. Whereas one, you're going to have to go in small amounts. So this one will pull, and it's going to take a little bit longer because we can't push the plunger up as far as we did before, which is fine, but it means that you're going to have to be careful, and that's why you use the fastest flowing one last, because it just makes the process a lot easier. And you can see it's slowly filling up there. And that is basically how you refill your ice resin plunger. It's fairly easy. It's a little bit messy. I would say after about 20 refills you're going to need to buy a new one because it just starts to get really sticky and icky. And that's fine. At that price it's pretty good. So you're going to need to buy a plunger, and you'll also want to buy spare bottles of the ice resin so that you can fill it. Okay, and we're almost there. I just want to show you. You want to stop with it looking about equal. Okay, so I'll need to do one more refill. Okay, so you want to make sure that it's about equal. Otherwise you're going to have trouble with the plunger. Okay, so I stop about there. And I'd say that's just about level. I need to add just a touch more resin to make sure that it is level. I don't need a lot of resin, just need a touch. There we are. Alright, then you can see it there about equal. Now you will grab a wet wipe and just give it a light dab around the edges because you want to remove any resin that might have pulled up. Then grab your cap and twist it closed, and there you go. You've now got a resin plunger ready to use again. And all you do to use it is you unscrew the cap, put it over whatever mixing bowl you're going to use, place on the plunger until you have the amount of resin that you want, and then proceed to mix it the same as I showed you before. Okay, so these are out of the oven and they're cured in about 2.5 hours. So you can see that it speeds up that curing time a lot. Now this one, we have had no spills, but hopefully you can see that there's a bit of a edge that's pulled away over there and down this end as well. Now that's pretty normal. I'll show you what to do with that in just a moment. However, this one, we actually got 2 spills. So I'm just going to pull it out and you can see it's spilled under the bead as well. Now you want to get this while it's still flexible. So you can see that this is the resin is still flexible. That is quite important whether you are doing this straight out of the oven or if you are doing it just curing on its own. So if you've got a spill and you're just curing this completely on its own, you want to do this around the about the 8-hour mark. What you want to do is you want to take a blade and you want to slice along the edge, and all you're doing is you're slicing into that resin. And that's going to essentially get it to move off of the clay. There, so you can see it's coming off nicely. And this is a lot easier to do with 2-part resins rather than UV resins. Not quite sure why, but it just seems like it just slips off so much better. But it only does this if it's still slightly flexible. And then you can just peel it straight off the back, like so. And you might want to give the back a little bit of a sand afterwards. But there we are. And it comes out much neater. So that is how you would fix a resin spill with these. Now, because of how quickly these have cured, I think they've actually cured under 2 hours. They've cured very quickly. Our resin over here, although it has started to cure, you can see that it is still quite viscous. We can actually take this and we can pour this on here, and this is from the same batch. So with this whole oven technique you could actually use the resin twice. Same resin twice to coat the bead. Okay. And I'm just spreading that around. And now another thing I forgot to mention earlier with the oven is because you're warming up that resin quite a bit above normal room temperature, the resin becomes more viscous, so you are more likely to get spills. So you can choose between a faster cure but more likelihood of getting spills, or you can go with the 12-hour long curing time and the chance of spills is a lot lower. So that's just something for you to think about. fan. And I'll pop these into the oven again for about an hour. Seems like it cures in about an hour to an hour and a half. And that putting it in the oven does not damage the beads at all, or the resin, because polymer clay is heat safe, so you don't have to worry about that at all. That is a very fine temperature for it to be at. It's not going to damage it in any aspect. And the resin, so long as you've got it under 50 Celsius, it will just keep the resin nice and warm. It's not going to cause it to burn at all. Another way you can speed it up is you can put it into direct sunlight. That is still going to speed up the curing time, but it's going to speed it up less than if you put it in an oven. Okay, so these are out of the oven and all finished. So they're nice and hard, as you can hear. They were put in for about 2.5 hours to make sure that they are solid, and we didn't get any spills, and you can see that there are no edges that have pulled away either. So that is basically how you use the two-part resins. Those are all the tricks I know of currently. So let me know if you have any questions. You can contact me through Facebook, or if there's a comment section below this video, you can always comment in the comment section, and I will try to answer your question as best as possible. And also, if you would like more tutorials like this, let me know in the comments below. If you have tips and tricks of your own, you can also leave them in the comments below, as that is always helpful to everybody. And as always, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.